The choice is Democrat or Republican. Is that it? We have a two-party system. Can you vote for something besides that? What if you don't like either one? These are the questions we try to answer. We have a two-party system in the United States. We're going to talk about that system. Is it a good system? What are the alternatives? And is it actually a two-party system? Let's talk about it. Here we go. So if you're looking at North Korea as a model for the type of party system you want, then the single party system or one party system is the way to go, folks. Usually your communist states or your dictatorships have one party represented in government. Sometimes, once in a blue moon, you have a democracy that is represented by a single party system, but not very often. South Africa would be an example of that. But usually the single party system is not very democratic because that party runs the show and everybody either is required to be a part of that party or are afraid to go against that party. So the single party system would not be a good system to be in. What's the other option? Well, let's go to our system, the two-party system. Here we go. So here in the great America, we have a two-party system. And we have had a two-party system for quite a while. The Democrats and Republicans are our two parties, and any other minor parties either are not represented or cannot get to that national level and really become a power in politics and government. So the good thing about a two-party system is that we have a system where let's use our current government as an example. The Republicans are in control of Congress, which is made up of the Senate and the House of Representatives. They're also in charge of the presidency because the president is a Republican. Their ideology, which is conservative, is the majority in the Supreme Court. Some people can argue that the Supreme Court is not supposed to have an ideology, but it does. So they control all three branches of government. Most governors of states, the head executive of that state, or we can consider it like the president of that state, are Republicans. Really, the Republicans control most of, or the majority of government. So it almost seems like we have a single party system, right? Wrong. We don't. Because we also have the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is just barely a minority party in the Senate. So because the Senate requires a supermajority to pass a lot of things, the Democrats in that party actually have quite a bit of power. And that's the good thing about having a two-party system. The party that is not in power is usually just slightly out of power. And they keep the other party, the Republicans in this case, in check. Because if the Republicans mess up, understand that by 2018, Democrats could control Congress. So they have to cross their I's and dot their T's. All right. So that's one positive thing about the two-party system. It works well. And we're going to talk about multi-party systems. They actually usually end up as a two-party system because the majority groups, the groups that have the most people, usually form what's known as a coalition, a multi-party coalition. And they are like the ruling government coalition. So they're like one party. And then all of the other groups form the minority party. So multi-party systems usually end up as a two-party system anyway. Let's talk about multi-party systems. These usually mean if you have a true multi-party system, it usually means there's some chaos involved. It may mean that you have no government. Sometimes they work. Other countries, especially in Europe, have multi-party systems, but like I said before, they're actually two-party systems because they end up dividing themselves into two halves. They form coalitions, the party in power and the parties not in power. So let's talk about a true multi-party system. We actually had one of these in our country. In 1860, we had 4 parties. We had the new Republican Party. We had the Southern Democrats. We had the Constitutional Union Party. And we had the Northern Democratic Party. So all 4 of those parties are competing against each other. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln and his Republican Party are the winners. But here's the thing. Lincoln wins with 40% of the vote. So he never got a majority, which would be over 50% of the vote. Because he only got that 40%, a lot of Southern Democrats and even some Northern Democrats and the other parties, people that voted against him did not view him as the true president. And in fact, people in the South said, you know what? We gonna have a civil war because he ain't my president, not my president. That sounds familiar. Anywho, so this really doesn't work. You have to form a coalition of some sort because everybody's views have to be brought together for things to work out. Even though we only have 2 parties, Democrats and Republicans, the people that are representatives in those parties represent a lot of different people and different views. And depending on where they're from and the people they represent, they are going to fall in a lot of different places on that ideological spectrum that we talked about in our previous video. So, for example, let's look at the Democratic Party and all the different faces of that party. First of all, we have Democrats that, if they didn't have Democrat after their name, you would probably think they were Republicans. They're what we call moderate Democrats. Joe Manchin of West Virginia is a perfect example of this. He represents coal country. And a lot of those people voted for Donald Trump because Donald Trump said he was going to help the coal miners. And that was a big point of emphasis for Joe Manchin. He wants to help his people, that a lot of them are in this coal industry. So he accepts and votes for a lot of Republican policies if they help his own people. He's not very liberal. So that's an example of a moderate Democrat. We have fairly liberal Democrats. Keith Ellison of Minnesota is, I think, the only Muslim Democrat we have. So that makes him vastly different than most representatives. He's fairly liberal in a lot of his views. He'd certainly almost be considered the far left. And then, of course, we have the ultra-liberal Democrats. For example, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Warren has like 100% progressive voting record. She won't vote for something if it's not a liberal policy. Bernie Sanders is right there with her. He calls himself a socialist. So a lot of different people make up that party. Let's talk about the Republican Party. We have moderate Republicans that socially they're fairly liberal. Susan Collins of Maine, she is fairly liberal in her views, and she's voted against a lot of Republican policies in her years. She just voted against the Obamacare repeal bill. So that's an example of a more liberal, I wouldn't say very liberal, but a more liberal Republican. I mean, she's a Republican, and I believe she's for women's rights, women's right to choose. I'm not 100% sure on that, but pretty controversial for the Republican Party. You have guys in the middle like John McCain. I wouldn't call him ultra conservative by any means. I mean, he's willing to vote either way. He's right in the middle. He'd be probably considered a moderate Republican. He thought about switching the Democratic Party for a while back. You also have the more conservative Ted Cruz, what we would probably call a Tea Party candidate. All right, against big government. He's very conservative, very very conservative. And then you have some ultra conservatives that are part of this Freedom Caucus, like Mark Meadows. So a lot of different faces out there representing the party. It's more like a coalition if you think about it, but the only difference is instead of Mark Meadows being part of the super conservative party and John McCain being, representing the road party or the center party, and Susan Collins representing the liberal conservative party or something like that, they all go under one banner. Why? Because parties are important for organizational things. They get people elected. They're very important. And that really ends our 2 videos on political parties. So I hope it helps you understand some things.